Part 5. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 41. Chapter 41, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince robbed a folk girl. The heavy snow has stopped for the first time, roads are difficult to clear, goods are backlogged, and water transportation is on the rise. Although it was the Su family, a large family in the main city of Ziliang, who started water transportation this time, with a stable foundation and wide connections, many people still have a wait-and-see attitude. After all, water is dangerous and no one dares to risk it. The third young master of the Su family is young but very adventurous. When he saw all the merchants, he didn't dare to stretch his legs, so he gritted his teeth and reduced the cost of water transportation to 10%. If road transportation requires 100 taels of silver, then water transportation only requires 10 taels. Faced with such a huge temptation, some people are willing to try something new. The few medicine shops in the main city of Huajia have medicinal materials exchanges with shops in other cities. The medicine shop of Huajia also accumulated a lot of medicinal materials during the snowstorm. The third young master of the Su family wants to talk to the Hua family, but he has been unable to choose the person to come forward. Ling Wei, the eldest daughter-in-law in charge of the Hua family, did not agree with water transportation at all, but Tao Yuxian thought it was worth a try. Since Fan Qinjiao got rid of the charcoal business, he has been taken by Tao Yuxian all day long, always accompanying his grandmother and his eldest sister-in-law. Whenever the eldest daughter-in-law Ling Wei sees Fan Qinjiao standing next to the old lady, her eyes are on fire. Fan Qinjiao is very self-aware that she is disliked by others, but every time she wants to avoid being disliked, her grandmother will hold her hand and say firmly, "You are my granddaughter." On this day, Fan Qinjiao had just returned from his grandmother's stay. Nanny Su said anxiously, "The little miss is not good. The miss is ill." Fan Qinjiao's expression changed and he rushed directly into the yard. The mother on the bed looked sallow and her brows were furrowed. Fan Qinjiao carefully checked her mother's pulse. Although the problem was not serious, she still couldn't relax. "My mother's pulse is weak and slippery. It's obvious that she has been overworked, but what happened?" Suyan knew that some words did not say that she shouldn't say, but she looked at her lady's face that had just raised her complexion and faded again. How can this heart not hurt? Hunting her teeth, Nanny Su turned around and took out a bunch of things from the bed cabinet and stuffed them into Fan Qinjiao's hand. "Little miss, you'd better see for yourself." Fan Qinjiao lowered his head slightly, but his face completely darkened with just one glance. She thought that after that day, her irresponsible father would realize something, but instead he started to secretly write letters to her mother, asking her mother to take her back. Looking at every word in the letter that seemed to be sincere, Fan Qinjiao felt very ridiculous. "Crescent moon, why don't we go back?" Hua Yulian on the bed didn't know when she opened her eyes. Only by going back can her Uia have a serious status, and only by going back can her Uia find a good husband. She cannot delay her only crescent moon just because of her temporary comfort. Fan Qinjiao lowered his head and asked softly, "Mother, do you want to go back?" Hua Yuelian suddenly laughed, with such bitterness and helplessness, "It doesn't matter whether mother wants it or not. Mother just wants you to go back, and I want you to have an upright identity." Fan Qinjiao held his mother's hand tightly, his raised eyes were extremely cold. "In addition to giving me a surname, what else has the Fan family given me over the years? If I really rely on begging to get a so-called identity, then it's okay not to have an identity." Crescent moon. "Mother, I believe that your crescent moon can carry me and you." As soon as he finished speaking, Fan Qinjiao stood up and left. Hua Yuelian was a little stunned. She always thought that returning to Fan Mansion would be the best destination for her family Yuya. She also always thought that Yuya wanted to go back and acknowledge her ancestors, but looking at Yuya's determined look just now, could it be that she had made a mistake? On the other hand, Nanny Sue comforted her and said, "Miss, don't look at me because I am small, but my brain is not inferior to others. Miss, please don't worry about me." Huayuelian nodded, and after a long time she murmured, "It seems that I really thought wrong." In the room in the side courtyard, Fan Kinjao's eyes were cold and his heart was even colder. What a Fan family! First he treated her softly and hard, and now he put a sharp knife engraved with virtue on her mother's neck. It's really a shame for them. The next morning, Fan Kinjao went out early. Looking at the murderous look on her little lady's face, Aunt Sue was afraid that something was going to happen and hurriedly followed her out. However, before she could speak, Fan Kinjao blocked her back. Facing Nanny Sue's worried gaze, Fan Kinjao showed a reassuring smile. "It's just a Fan mansion, so why bother with so much effort?" Tightening the cotton cloak around him, Fan Kinjao hurried out of Hua's house, but before he could take a few steps, he felt something pressing on his feet. Fan Kinjao looked down and saw a white dough bun on her feet. As if he noticed her gaze, the bun also turned its little head and raised its head. A pair of blue eyes were as round as glutinous rice balls, and it seemed to have noticed that Fan Kinjao was also looking at it. It stood up slowly and proudly, but it was too small, and Fan Kinjao accidentally followed it. Kinjao's shoes fell down. The furry little head was inserted directly into the snowdrift, leaving only two short legs standing against the wind. Fan Kinjao stretched out his hand to pick it up and pressed its pink and tender nose. "Whose kitten are you from?" The little thing seemed to dislike the name kitten very much. He raised his head proudly and even the tail behind his buttocks was pouted. "Fan Kinjao. Although the calves are only 2 inches, they are quite impressive." "Tax you, come here," a cold voice sounded slowly. The voice was very soft, as if it was gone with the wind. Fan Kinjao couldn't hear the sound of wind in his ears. Instead, the little thing in his hand heard it clearly. He immediately twisted his soft little body and jumped out of Fan Kinjao's hand. "Go down." Fan Kinjao quickly lowered his head to look for it, only to see the little thing biting the corner of her skirt and pulling continuously. It was really too small, and Fan Kinjao didn't want to hurt it, so he simply followed its wishes. A carriage was parked quietly in the alley not far away. The little thing pulled Fan Kinjao until he saw the carriage before he let go. He completely ignored the hem of the skirt where he had bitten a hole, and walked towards it with great effort. "The carriage climbs." Fan Kinjao sighed, picked it up, looked at the carriage and said softly, "Excuse me." Before he finished speaking, the closed carriage door suddenly opened, and a hand that looked like white porcelain stretched out. Pure white expanded sleeves half cover the back of the hands, and the slender fingers bloom slowly like an epiphyllum. Fan Kinjao quickly put the little thing in his arms over, but unexpectedly the hand actually grasped her wrist. His eyes were dazzled when the sudden force pulled her into the carriage. In the dim carriage, leaning on a soft couch made of white fur, a young man who was as quiet as a valley and glowing with the moonlight was leaning. Fan Kinjao looked at the familiar face wearing a golden crown and frowned. "What does this mean, Your Highness?" Bailey Fengming looked at her, with a half-hearted smile in his bottomless eyes, "Robbing a common girl by force." "Fan Kinjao. Do you still remember that you are the Crown Prince of Ziliang?" Bailey Fengming looked at the speechlessness written on the palm-sized face, smiled softly, and then shouted to the outside at a slightly too loud voice, "Let's go." As the wheels rolled slowly, Fan Kinjao became quiet. After all, His Majesty the Crown Prince can even do such things as robbing civilian girls. Even if she is struggling, it will be in vain. She might as well cooperate, and maybe a quick victory can be achieved. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 42. Chapter 42. Wouldn't it be nice to just be my person? In the carriage, the silence was a little depressing. Only the little thing like a doughy steamed bun slept soundly in Fan Kinjao's arms, with his pink mouth slightly open, and his saliva flowed into a river without even realizing it. Fan Kinjao smiled with a smile that he didn't even notice, and gently helped wipe it. Bailey Fengming looked at the scene with calm eyes. You are in love with it? Fan Kinjao lowered his eyes and looked at the little thing in his arms, and said softly, it has something very precious on it, but I don't. She was once innocent and had no time, but these things were eventually crushed into dregs and buried in the wasteland with her. So from the moment she opened her eyes again, there was only hatred and kindness in her eyes. Bailey Fengming remained silent and did not answer. The carriage returned to an oppressive silence. The slow-moving carriage turned into a remote mansion in the western suburbs and then gradually stopped. Fan Kinjao jumped off the carriage and frowned for a moment. As far as she knows, don't the princes all live in the East Palace in the palace? Bailey Fengming walked up to her and said softly, this house was the dowry of my mother. Although I don't come here often, it is always cleaned. You don't need to be as cautious as entering the palace. After saying that, he walked towards the mansion first. Fan Kinjao looked at the thin figure. If he hadn't raped the girl first, she would have really thought he cared about her. The mansion is very large and also very elegantly built. Fan Kinjao just took a few steps when he felt the instep of his feet sink again. Slowly lowered her head, this time a black charcoal ball stuck to her instep. The little thing who had been sleeping soundly in Fan Kinjao's arms seemed to smell a familiar scent and struggled to jump to the ground, rubbing against the black charcoal balls. The sticky appearance of one black and one white really looks like two hairballs turned into sperm. Lian 11 explained in a low voice, His Royal Highness the Prince picked them up at the hunting ground when he accompanied His Majesty on hunting. At that time, their parents had been bitten to death by mountain tigers. Our prince was kind and took them back. These white ones are called walking on the snow, the black one is called Chaiwu. Fan Kinjao felt heavy in his heart. It turned out that they were also two poor little people. Lian 11 saw Fan Kinjao standing there with no intention of leaving, so he could only speak again, Miss Kinjao, His Royal Highness is already waiting for you in the main hall. Fan Kinjao nodded, then withdrew his gaze and went up the steps. In the main hall, Bailey Fengming was sitting on the soft couch, thinking about something. When he saw her entering, he smiled, and said, Come and sit. Fan Kinjao was silent for a moment, then walked over and sat on the other side of the soft couch. Bailey Fengming raised his eyebrows in surprise, I thought you would be scared. Fan Kinjao said calmly, If His Highness the Crown Prince wants to do something to me, no matter how far away I am, so what? I will still be called right in front of His Highness the Crown Prince's finger. Even if you have two women, what else can't you do? Bailey Fengming did not expect that the person who had been hiding his sharp edge in the palace would now show his claws towards him. With His Royal Highness, who has always been calm about things, was stunned. Fan Kinjao touched the letter in his sleeve, unwilling to pretend any more. What exactly does His Highness the Crown Prince want? You might as well say it directly. I want you to be mine. Fan Kinjao. Her hands were itchy and she wanted to hit someone. Bailey Fengming turned to look at her, with a soft and pleasant voice, I heard that my mother said that you saved my life. Logically speaking, I should return this love to you, but now I don't even have time to take care of myself. Since you need me, I need you too. How about you help me treat my eyes and I will always stand behind you. Having a prince from the Eastern Palace standing behind you to protect him is something no one can ask for. But Fan Kinjao had no time to be happy, she just turned her head and looked at the young man beside her in surprise. By chance, he was still looking at her. With their eyes facing each other, this may be the first time that Fan Kinjao seriously looks at the young man who was brought back from the gate of hell. The jade faces and the lips, the eyebrows are picturesque, and when Runyu is clear and light. Especially a pair of calm eyes, which hide the already restrained momentum even more unpredictable. Looking directly at the prince is a serious crime, but at this moment, Fan Kinjao only stared at his eyes and did not care about other etiquette. Recalling her encounter with him in the palace, she could not find any trace of his unclear vision. His wrist suddenly tightened, and his hand reached out at some point. With just a little force, she was lifted up from the soft couch and threw herself into his arms. In my ears, there is a steady and powerful heartbeat. The smell of Zishius Yang is all in your nose. Fan Kinjao's heart beat hard for no reason, but he was more angry. Is this how she sees someone who can be frivolous? But when she raised her head angrily, she saw him looking at her with a calm expression. This way we can see clearly. It was at this moment that Fan Kinjao saw clearly the hazy eyes in front of him. The inside is turbid and the fundus of the eyes is white. It was as if there was a layer of ethereal white veil covering the dark valley-like eyes. When did this happen? It's been like this since I woke up. Fan Kinjao looked at the calm young man in front of him. He would be lying if he said he wasn't scared. In this way, when she entered the palace and saw him, he could no longer see clearly. In other words, with such a pair of eyes, even seeing something at a close distance would be quite difficult and blurry. But he was able to be calm on the day of the palace banquet. The most important thing is that no one in the palace noticed anything unusual about him for such a long time. Fan Kinjao had to re-examine the young man in front of him, how restrained and calm he was to be so young and mature. Bailey Fengming looked calm and just let her look at him quietly. Even though the black eyes were covered with white mist, there was no trace of turbid evil thoughts. Even with those thin lips, the words that came out were extremely unclear. Heal my eyes and let me be your solid backing. Wouldn't it be good to be my person? Fan Kinjao nodded, but then shook his head. Bailey Fengming raised his eyebrows slightly, waiting for her bold answer. Fan Kinjao looked at him without fear. I can help you heal your eyes, but I'm not weak enough to need the help of others to walk down. My path is my path, even if I step on thorns, I will be the same as others. It's irrelevant. Bailey Fengming still raised his eyebrows. So, you already have a way to get the Meng family to let people go. Fan Kinjao had always known that Ji Hongliao belonged to the queen, so she felt that it was natural for her to know about him. I have already made my plans regarding Heli. Even if my grandfather will seek support from concubine Yu in the future, I can still find someone more powerful than concubine Yu. Are you talking about the father? Fan Kinjao nodded. As long as the emperor agrees to my mother's reconciliation, I will bear all the expenses of the military camp from now on. Grandma gave her a lot of money from selling charcoal, so she should be able to open a shop, even if it is small. She has a way to make it big quickly. Did you know that the amount required for a year's military camp is 1/7 of the tax money mentioned by the Ministry of Household Affairs? Fan Kinjao's eyes were firm. Since I can say it, I can definitely do it. In the last life, even though she was brainwashed into being stupid by the Fan family, she still did not delay in making money for the Fan family and paving the way for wrong to become the wolf of wrongs. Bailey Fengming knew that she was bold, but he didn't expect her to be so courageous. There are not many people in the world who dare to negotiate terms with father. Your Highness, my servant, Lian 11 walked in with the cakes that had just been made in the backyard. He raised his eyes towards the two people rolling into a pile and quickly stepped back with his eyes closed. My servant didn't see anything. Fan Kinjao realized belatedly that he was still lying on that warm chest. Bailey Fengming looked at the embarrassment written all over the palm-sized face and half smiled. Fortunately, you also have such panic moments. Fan Kinjao, who was getting up in a panic, said. Bailey Fengming smiled slightly. Otherwise, I would really think that your little body contains a woman of 70 or 80 years old. Old-fashioned, serious, cold, and aloof. Fan Kinjao. You'd better shut up. End of this chapter. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 43. Chapter 43, Killing with a borrowed knife without leaving any trace. When Fan Kinjao walked out of the main hall, Taxu and Chaiwu were still playing happily in the yard. Seeing that Bailey Fengming was giving Lian 11 some instructions, she didn't want to eavesdrop, so she walked over to Taxu and Chaiwu and squatted down, watching the two little guys having fun. Ta Shui really liked Fan Kinjao. Not only did she move her buttocks towards Fan Kinjao, she even bit Chaiwu's ear and pulled Chaiwu together. Chaiwu was aloof and pulled him back with all his strength. Taxu is also stubborn and keeps pushing forward with all his might. Chaiwu screamed in pain from being pinched. Fan Kinjao quickly held Ta Shui in his arms, and then went to check Chaiwu's ears. The little ears covered with saliva were not bitten, so he breathed a sigh of relief. Take this. Bailey Fengming's voice sounded softly behind him. Fan Kinjao wanted to put Taxu on the ground, but Taxu's fleshy claws were holding onto her clothes, so she had to hug him and get up together. Taking what Bailey Fengming handed over, the smile on Fan Kinjao's face disappeared altogether. Is His Highness the Prince giving alms to me? Bailey Fengming looked at the frizzy little face in front of him and smiled lightly. It's empty anyway, so why not do something useful? Since you spend money to rent, it's the same thing if you pay the rent to me in the end. Fan Kinjao was a little surprised. How did you know that I plan to open a shop? Bailey Fengming smiled clearly. If you want to impress my father, you must first show your sincerity. You can make a lot of money selling charcoal, but military pay is not a small figure. Soldiers need weapons to fight. You want to make money for yourself if you need a shop. Are you still planning to make money with a big knife? Fan Kinjao was indescribably shocked and relieved. She obviously didn't say anything, but he knew it immediately. If Bailey Rongs had such a mind, even if she was reborn, she would not be his opponent. Okay, I will send you the rent after a while. Fan Kinjao looked down at the land deed in her hand. If she rented it by herself, she would not be able to rent such a good location. Bailey Fengming smiled slightly and said, don't worry, you keep the money first and it will always need to be turned over. I can also use this shop as a shareholding. Such a good shop, located on the main street, he said it would not be a loss for her if they were to join the partnership. Fan Kinjao thought that if he gave him the rent now, he would indeed be a little short of money, so he nodded, which was regarded as acquiescing to the two people's plan to form a partnership. Just as she was about to continue walking towards the door of the mansion, she realized that Ta Shui had already fallen asleep in her arms, and her little claws seemed to be stuck to her body, and she couldn't break them off. This cat. Bailey Fengming was generous. I'll just raise it for you. Fan Kinjao frowned and subconsciously refused. However, his pleasant voice sounded again. Taxu is familiar with the smell of Chaiwu, and he can usually lead the way and deliver letters. Otherwise, how will you treat my eyes in the future? Or do you want me to treat my eyes every time, going to pick you up? I don't care. Fan Kinjao interrupted directly. Okay, that's it. If others knew that she had an interaction with the prince, it's better to do less than to do more. Seeing Fan Kinjao leave the house, Lian 11 couldn't help but said, Your Highness, aren't these two swan leopards? Afraid that he had made a mistake, he looked specifically at Chaiwu, who also slept on the ground until taking off. Bailey Fengming's eyes suddenly darkened a bit, and even his always gentle and elegant face lost a little warmth. No matter what it is, as long as you like it, there is no need to correct it. Your Highness, we should return to the palace. If the Emperor asks. Let's go. Fan Kinjao walked smoothly around the streets and among the crowds. The little guy in her arms seemed to be really sleepy, and he actually snored in her arms. Seeing the plaque hanging in Fan Mansion approaching, Fan Kinjao quickly put the small thing in his arms into the lapel of his clothes, making sure that even his head was covered, and then walked over. The servants guarding Fan Mansion all knew Fan Kinjao, but they couldn't believe their eyes when they saw the eldest lady they hadn't seen for many years coming back. "Can you help me call Grandma Fan out? I want to go back home." Fan Kinjao looked pitifully at the young man at the door, but his feet stopped at the foot of the steps. She was so disgusted that she didn't want to touch anything related to the Fan family. The boys were stunned for a moment, then turned around and went in to report the news. Not long after, Zy Ling came out. The injuries on his face have mostly healed, but some traces can still be seen. Now when he saw Fan Kinjao, Zy Ling felt pain everywhere in his body. He simply didn't even bother to pretend. "Fan Kinjao, I'm warning you, don't think that you can be proud of both the master and the young master asking you to come back. Since originally it can get you and your mother kicked out, and it can do the same now." Fan Kinjao suddenly cried aggrievedly and grabbed Zy Ling's hand. "As long as you let me and my mother come back, I will serve you well. Even if you want to be a grandma, my mother agrees, so just let me come back with my mother." Zy Ling taunted her lips sarcastically, "It's just a daydream. Fan Kinjao, let me tell you, as long as I'm here, you and your mother will never even think about stepping into Fan's house." Fan Kinjao burst into tears, but he was afraid of Zy Ling's sarcastic face. He looked up at Fan's plaque expectantly for a long time, and finally turned around and ran away, covering his face. Zy Ling hummed triumphantly, turned around and was about to go up the steps, but suddenly stopped again. "I saw a letter falling on the ground. And Li Xin." Zy Ling bent down to pick it up. The more he looked at the corners of his lips, the more he couldn't help but raise his lips. Unexpectedly, Hua Yulian was a more respectable person. "I was afraid that the little Fan Kinjao was reluctant to part with the glory and wealth of the Fan family, so he asked for this by sending and leaving the letter." Looking up into the distance, Zy Ling quickly put He Lixin into her arms when she saw that Fan Kinjao was no longer there. In the distant alley, Fan Kinjao, who should have been crying loudly, had a cold expression on his face at the moment. Always watching Zy Ling enter the house, she turned around and left. Zy Ling is a smart person, she naturally knows what to do to get what she wants. Zy Ling returned to the house with a happy face. She went to the kitchen to cook a few side dishes and boiled a pot of wine. After everything was prepared, she went back to her yard to wash up and dress up before carrying the tray. Entered the east courtyard. The east courtyard was originally the courtyard where Hua Yuelian married into the Fan family. After Hua Yuelian left, it had been vacant. Fan Yurong, who had been arguing with Zy Ling for several days, had no choice but to stay temporarily. "Come in. No one has taken care of this place for a long time, and the once cozy courtyard is now covered with dust." Fan Yurong was sitting in a cold room wearing a 3-layer cotton robe, his face turned blue from the cold. In the past few days, he could always think of Hua Yuelian's appearance when she first got married. She was shy and submissive to him, but she was a bit aloof, and she lacked the temperament that men like. But now he doesn't know why, but he suddenly feels that there is nothing wrong with being aloof. At least it is always better than being arrogant and unabashed. Someone opened the door and walked in. Fan Yurong, who was still immersed in memories, just thought that the person he was thinking about was back, and subconsciously said, "Yulian." Zy Ling was filled with hatred, but she still had a charming smile on her face. "Master, I'm here to see you." Fan Yurong looked at the face that was far from his memory and immediately said in a deep voice, "What are you doing here?" End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 44. Chapter 44. There is no peace at home and in chaos. Zy Ling sat next to Fan Yurong and put the hot wine into Fan Yurong's hand. I have been thinking about it for a long time during this period. If the young master wants to bring him back, please bring him back. I will, since I am already the young master's person, I will always stand by the young master's side. Fan Yurong didn't quite believe what Zi Ling said. Since he brought her close to the door, he still knew how she treated Huayu and her daughter. But he was too cold, and when he thought about how he hadn't eaten for a day, even if he suspected Zi Ling, he couldn't resist the temptation of the delicious food in front of him. After devouring his food, he also drank a bottle of wine. Fan Yurong's frozen body slowly began to warm up, and even his head felt dizzy. Looking at Zi Ling, who was sitting next to him and was gentle and obedient from beginning to end, he gradually let go of his suspicion. Don't worry, even if mother and daughter come back, there will still be a place for you and Ninger in this Fan mansion, Fan Yurong promised, patting his chest. Zi Ling naturally doesn't believe this, but she won't show it. I naturally believe in the master. As she spoke, her hand restlessly touched Fan Yurong's leg. During this period, Fan Yurong has been sleeping in the same courtyard as Zi Ling. His body has been empty for a long time and the effect of alcohol has been added to it. How can he endure it? It's just a turnover, that is, the drunkard is pressed under his body. That night, Fan Yurong managed to get a comfortable sleep, but before he had enough sleep, he heard someone calling, "Master, Governor's son is here. I want you to go to the main hall quickly." Fan Yurong frowned and opened his eyes, and stood up reluctantly. His head was no longer so heavy, but his steps were still a little weak. In the main hall, Fan Zixiu, who always had a dark face, looked at Fan Yurong's top-heavy character and was so angry that he raised the teacup in his hand and smashed it. Fan Yurong was so stunned that his head swelled up. "Father, what are you doing? You still have the nerve to ask me? Look at what good things you have done." Fan Zixiu couldn't understand why he gave birth to such a confused son after being so smart all his life. Fan Yurong covered his head and looked around, only to find that Sun Che was sitting under Fan Zixiu in official uniform, and not far in front of him, Zi Ling was kneeling on the ground, covering her face and crying. Just when Fan Yurong couldn't figure out what was going on, he saw Sun Che taking a letter from the government servant beside him. With a slight shake, he turned aside with the words to Fan Yurong's. "Before. This is the letter of peace and divorce that the eldest grandma of the Fan family sent to me this morning. Since Mr. Fan has signed it, if the woman does not come to me for settlement within a month, the peace and divorce will take effect. The official will make this peace known to the public." Sun Che tried his best to keep his voice calm, but his hands that were tightly clenched in his sleeves still gave him away. In other words, he didn't know whether he should be happy or worried. How can a cold and aloof woman like Yu Lian still live an upright life once divorced? But if she continues to be entangled with Fan Mansion, how will she get there in the future? In the final analysis, it was the man in front of her who delayed Yu Lian's life. Fan Yurong was completely dumbfounded. He was so stupid that he couldn't even feel Sun Che's murderous aura. "Son," Governor's son said, who is reconciling with whom?" "Fan Yurong, the minister of the Fan family, and Hua Yuelian, the eldest daughter of the Hua family." Boom! Something exploded inside Fan Yurong's head, causing his head to start buzzing. "It's impossible. Just yesterday I was thinking about getting Hua Yulian and her daughter back. How could I put a signature on the letter of reconciliation? No, no. I can't reconcile with Hua Yulian. She is mine. Even if I don't want her, she will still be my ghost when she dies." Sun Che's hands clenched under his sleeves. If it weren't for the fact that he was still wearing this official uniform, he really wished he could seek justice for Yu Lian with his own hands. Suddenly, Fan Yurong looked at Zi Ling, who was kneeling on the ground. Like crazy, he rushed over and grabbed Zi Ling's hair. "It was you deliberately got me drunk and asked me to sign the Healy book, right? You bitch, what are you doing? What's wrong with you?" Speak to me. Zy Ling bared her teeth in pain, but she still cried and said, young master, after you drank too much yesterday, you had to say something. Since that Hua Yulian doesn't know what's good, then let her get away as far as she wants. I'm just doing things according to the young master's wishes. Fan Yurong naturally did not believe what Zy Ling said, but he had no evidence. Fan Zixia was shaking all over, and he didn't know whether he was angry or cold. Sun Che didn't bother to look at this entanglement. He stood up and said to Fan Zixiu, I still have official duties, so I won't bother you anymore. After saying a few words, he took the yamen servant and left directly. Fan Yurong slumped down on the ground when he thought that all Fan Qinjiao's glory in the future had nothing to do with him. Zy Ling was still covering her face and crying, but hidden under her fingers was a raised lip. Fan Zixia quickly stood up and chased after Sun Che. When he passed by Fan Yurong, he didn't forget to kick him hard. Even though the heavy snow has stopped and the Hua family's charcoal is no longer needed, Fan Qinjiao is now praised by everyone in the main city of Ziliang. Such honor belongs to the Fan family and not the Hua family. So no matter what, he had to pressure Fan Qinjiao to come back and recognize his ancestor. Fan Swinning, who was standing aside, looked at her grandfather's figure hurriedly running out the door, his fists clenched until they turned white. On the street at noon, the Prime Minister of the first rank of the court just pulled a second-rank governor with a smile on his face, which simply made the people passing by lose their eyes. Of course, Fan Qinjiao had no chance to see such a grand occasion. At this time, accompanied by Nanny Su, she walked into the largest tooth market in the main city of Ziliang. The Yazi market is filled with cries, but they are not selling things, but people. These people include children from poor families who voluntarily sold them for a bowl of rice, as well as slaves who were tricked and abducted by Yazi. They stand in the most conspicuous place of each stall for the dignitaries and nobles who come and go to choose. Little miss, what do you think of that? Nanny Su dutifully selected a girl who was about the same age as her little miss and whose appearance was more pleasing to the eye. When she went out today, the old lady gave her many instructions, asking her to carefully select a few reliable and capable people for the young lady. The young lady is now older and always has to support her own servants. Originally, the old lady should have come in person, but the young lady was filial and did not want to see the old lady running around, so the old lady handed over this important task to her hands. Having children is a lifelong matter, so you have to be careful. Su Yan was thinking, and saw Fan Qinjiao stopped, reaching out, well, I want him. Mother Su raised her hand according to the finger, and her face looked as beautiful as if it had blossomed. This. What is this? End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 45. Chapter 45. You are my life and my debt. In the dirty stands, a thin young man huddled, silently allowing himself to be beaten and scolded by others. His handsome face was stained with blood, but his eyes were shining with an unruly light. Mother Su looked like she was going to have a heart attack. Little miss, why don't we sell a decent slave? Why bother? She was really afraid of such a person, and she couldn't guarantee that one day her precious little miss would be eaten. Fan Qinjiao's eyes were firm, still pointing at him, Mommy, I want him. Seeing that her young lady had made up her mind, Grandma Su had no choice but to sigh and ask Ren Yazi for the price. Fan Qinjiao took the opportunity to walk towards the young man. The young man's eyes were full of rawness and ferocity, and he kept making warning sounds similar to those of wild beasts. Fan Qinjiao was not afraid, he just stood in front of him and said softly, I don't care what you are now, but from now on, I want you to be my partner. The word partner seemed to be beyond the young man's understanding, and he was stunned for a moment. When Nanny Su came back, she saw her little lady leaning so close to her death. She was so frightened that she almost called her mother. She quickly gave the address of Hwa's house to Ren Yazi and then pulled Fan Kinjao away. Suyan thought that the teenager was an example. The rare lady liked it. If it was really difficult to tame, it would be the same as a slave, but then she found that she was really. It's an eye-opener. That evening, 4 servants lined up in front of Fan Kinjao. A young man with bright eyes, a pair of twins with sly eyebrows, and a middle-aged lady who still has charm. The corners of Nanny Sue's mouth really twitched again and again. Do all the young ladies in her family have such unique tastes? There's a rush. There was a noise from the room next door, and then the maid was heard crying and rushing out of the door. Mama Sue had no choice but to turn around and walk out. She had completely forgotten that there was a being next door who was not chained but wanted to eat people. Fan Kinjao looked at the people in front of him carefully, his eyes were gray. In the last life, Zy Ling bought these servants that no one wanted and gave them to her in order to make her feel comfortable being a fool. Unfortunately, these people followed her wholeheartedly. Even if she dies, she is the only master in their eyes. They may not be the best, but they are loyal. And she owed them all a life. What are your names? Fan Kinjao spoke softly, breaking the silence in the room. Slave Pengjing, the young man with bright eyes, knelt on the ground first. He died at the hands of a drunkard, and he didn't even close his eyes when he died. I am the elder sister, and my name is Ningtian. The twins who walked out next had cold faces. I'm my younger sister, my name is Ninggan. The one who came out next was someone who liked to laugh. Fan Swining randomly found a reason for the 2 sisters to steal and sent them to a poor village. They heard that they were given as wives to many men. Ningtian cut off his wrist and committed suicide that night. Ninggan became a fool overnight, and he followed suit within a few years. Miss, you are well, my slave. The moon has fallen. The woman who walked out last was 25 or 6 years old, and she was also the oldest among them. She was the only one who was relatively good. At least she died cleanly and had a complete body. Fan Kinjao nodded. There is no need to kneel down when you see me in private from now on, and there is no need to demean yourself as a slave. You are my people, not my slaves. Several people were confused after hearing this. Compared with other slaves, they are not outstanding or outstanding enough. They only think that if they have a master, they will be good, but they never expected that this master can be so good. Fan Kinjao pointed at them and said, Mother Su, let Pengjing and Yuoluo follow Chenyi first. You will take Ninggan first, and Ningtian will be raised first raising. Several other people cast envious glances at Ningtian. Ningtian looked calm, as if he didn't hear anything. Seeing that her young lady had made all the arrangements, Nanny Su didn't want to say anything more, so she quickly led a few people out of the house. After settling these people, she went to the main courtyard again and took care of today's children. Everything was told to the old lady truthfully. Old madam, the young lady asked the old slave to give this to you. Nanny Su put a banknote on the table. The young lady said that she would buy her people, and the old lady would keep the money for buy your own delicious food. When Tao Yuxian thought of her little Kinjao's filial appearance, the corners of her lips curled up. I didn't expect that there would be so many children. This is the first time that I have benefited from her. Those servants can just let her go. She's old enough to know what to do and what not to do. Mother Su nodded, looking down at the account book in Tao Yuxian's hand. The old lady is so frowning, but what happened? Tao Yuxian's face was not very good looking. No matter how beautiful she makes the account book, it can't be hidden from my eyes. Originally, I thought about waiting, but now it seems that there is no need to save anyone any face. Mama Su knew that she was naturally referring to her eldest aunt. In the Minjia courtyard, Fan Kinjao hurriedly checked her mother's body before she went to bed. After staying with her mother until she fell asleep, Fan Kinjao took the food that Nanny Su had been warming for her and walked towards the east side room. Go. Opening the door, you saw the wolf-like boy huddled in the corner. Fan Kinjao placed the food on the table, then walked up to him and slowly stretched out his hand towards him. He bared his teeth in protest like a wild animal, his handsome face full of ferocity. Fan Kinjao held his hand on his wrist, ready to be bitten by him, but unexpectedly, he looked at the little hand with a skin color that was distinct from his own, and gradually became quiet again. Fan Kinjao said truthfully, "I thought you would bite me." The young man spoke with great difficulty in a very jerky voice, "You said that we are. Fan Kinjao added, "Partner." The young man was stunned for a moment, then nodded. "Since we are partners, you have to integrate into my life so that we can always support each other and move forward. So the first thing you need to do is learn to eat," Fan Kinjao said, pulling the young man to the table. And put the chopsticks into his hand. Although the boy was a little resistant, he still studied awkwardly. How could he know at this time that two wild children raised by wolves were actually doing the same thing? In his last life, he was also forced to learn how to use chopsticks, walk normally, and learn to communicate with others. It was just that at that time, he felt guilty because he bit Fan Kinjao and made Fan Kinjao cry, so he decided to become like her so that he could protect her. In this life, although he did it voluntarily, his thoughts never changed. Become her and protect her. From today on, your name is Lanja. Good. Fan Kinjao was smiling on his face, but his heart was hurting. She didn't want to, let alone recall Lanja's death. Because she didn't dare. The days to come will be really busy. Fan Kinjao sent all the people around him who were busy learning their skills. Fan Kinjao was not idle either. Every day after treating Bailey Fengming's eyes, he would go to the drugstore to select medicinal materials. When he came back, he would lock himself in his room and study various medicinal materials. Originally, she planned to purchase the goods bit by bit, but unexpectedly, 3 days later, the house where the queen was married was filled with all kinds of medicinal materials. Fan Kinjao was a little dumbfounded. Bailey Fengming smiled as if nothing had happened, "Just pick up whatever you like. Now that you have become a shareholder, I always have to contribute, right?" Fan Kinjao. His secretly changed the initial 46-point score with Bailey Fengming to the current 50-50 score. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 46. Chapter 46. Please invite the imperial concubine to return to the palace. Fan Mansion has been very depressed recently, and the entire mansion is enveloped in a gloomy atmosphere. Fan Zixio shyly approached Sun Che for several days, but was blocked by Sun Che's business-related words. Fan Zixio knew that it was absolutely impossible to continue like this, but for a while he didn't know what to do. In the yard, Fan Swinning happened to pass by. Fan Zixio looked at the small figure and frowned. He remembered that concubine Yu also had Princess Yunyu, who was about the same age as Ning and Fan Zixio thought about it for a long time, then suddenly stood up and walked towards the door. Ning do you want to go to the palace with your grandfather to play? Fan Swinning wanted to climb higher, so she nodded happily. Fan Zixio immediately ordered the carriage to take Fan Swinning into the palace. On this day, everyone only knew that Prime Minister Fan's granddaughter was playing happily with Princess Yunyu of Guangzhou Palace, but no one knew that Fan Zixio had a private meeting with concubine Yu. The Hua family has been very noisy recently. The eldest daughter-in-law, Ling Wei, is determined not to let go of the shipping matter. Even if the other daughters-in-law want to take a gamble, they have no say. The third daughter-in-law Pihan felt so depressed that she took the fourth daughter-in-law Yafu to visit Hua Yulian every day and chat with Fan Kinjao for a while. I don't know why, they are quite grown up, and they still like chatting with Xiao Kinjao. Comfortable. I don't know what my sister-in-law is thinking. She doesn't give up on the good water transportation. Do we have to watch the backlog of medicinal materials in our shop to be happy? Pihin, the third daughter-in-law, couldn't help but murmured, hating that she was just a human being. The daughter-in-law of the third wife has to look at people's faces even when she speaks. The fourth daughter-in-law, Yafu, also sighed. Sister-in-law said yesterday that at worst, each family will not pay dividends this year. The private money of several houses is saved from the dividends of various shops at the end of the year. If there is no money, no house will be happy. Fan Kinjao doesn't care, but her mother is frail now. If she doesn't have the money to open a small kitchen, she is afraid that her body will be exhausted. She didn't want to get involved in family affairs, but she absolutely couldn't let anyone else blame her mother. Instead of being so entangled, the third and fourth aunts should stick to their opinions and agree to the sea transportation. The third daughter-in-law Pihan was stunned. Isn't that going against my sister-in-law? Fan Kinjao smiled softly and said, if you, aunties, believe me, just do as I say. The two daughters-in-law looked at each other. They believed in Xiao Kinjao. They have seen everything that Kinjao has done since she was little. Now even the servants in the house will give a thumbs up when they mention Miss Kinjao. Since Xiao Kinjao said so, let's do it. Fine. Fan Kinjao smiled but said nothing. Let each family have differences first before a piece of pie can be completely cut. Now she only needs to watch quietly from the sidelines, waiting for the time to come, and then take the initiative to defeat the enemy with one move. The door to the room, which was ajar, was suddenly knocked open. Happy concubine? The two daughters-in-law stood up in shock. It is no small matter for a concubine to leave the palace, but as far as they know, the Hua family has nothing to do with concubine Yu. You guessed it right. Fan Kinjao had deep black eyes and a sneer on his lips. Sure enough, it came anyway. It seems that Ziwiling handled the matter well, otherwise Fan Zixia would not have been desperate to find concubine Yu. Even though the prince in the East Palace has been appointed heir, his health has not been good. The master of Hyogyo Temple even said that the prince's life is unlucky. Concubine Yu did not miss this opportunity in her last life, and she will not let it go in this life. If it is the same as in her previous life, concubine Yu would have secretly started to pave the way for Bailey wrongs. Fan Zixio is one of the colleagues of the third prince. We are all in the same boat. Now that Fan is having trouble self-study, concubine Yu will naturally not sit idly by. Outside the door, Grandma He's voice suddenly sounded, Miss Kinjao, the old lady wants you to go to the main hall immediately. Mother Su is like Mao, the noble concubine is here, what do you want to do with the young lady? Fan Kinjao glanced towards the back room and said, I acted as a lobbyist for Fan Mansion and asked my mother and I to go back. When Grandma Su heard this, she was completely furious. Even the third daughter-in-law Pihan and the fourth daughter-in-law Yafu looked ugly. Little Kinjao and their sister-in-law have suffered so much in the Fan Mansion. In the past, they didn't care about the Fan Mansion. But now that Xiao Kinjao has received the emperor's praise and attention, the Fan Mansion is eager to rob them. What a shameless person. Little miss, do you and miss really want to go back? No matter how tough Nanny Su is, she can't be tougher than the concubines in the palace, especially concubine Yu. I heard that in the palace, even the Queen Empress has to face her. How dare she, a little house slave, say anything? Fan Kinjao's deep black eyes suddenly flashed with a chill. Now that the matter has come to this, it is better to burn the cauldron and sink the boat. Mother Su, do you know which uncle is in the military camp now? Mother Su glanced at the third daughter-in-law Pihan, only the third young master is here. Fan Kinjao looked at his third daughter-in-law Pihan and said, Third aunt, please find me a set of clothes that belong to my third uncle. It is best that they are something that my third uncle often wears. The third daughter-in-law, Pihan, stood up and walked out the door. Okay, I'll go look for her right now. but I was panicking. This little Kinjao was so crazy that he even dared to fight with the imperial concubine. But why does she want to go crazy together? In the room, Fan Kinjao lowered his voice and said, "Fourth sister-in-law, you should find a trustworthy boy now. Later, you can change into my third uncle's clothes, ride a horse around the city, and give that boy some money. Please prepare some broken coins and scatter them as you walk. The more attention you will get, the better." The fourth daughter-in-law Yafu is afraid, but she is afraid that Xiao Kinjao and her sister-in-law are part of their family. Even if she is scared to death, she cannot just watch. "Don't worry, Xiao Kinjao, I will go find him now." Fan Kinjao took a breath and asked Aunt Su to call Ningtian and Ninggan in again. After a period of training, Ninggan already looked like a little girl, but Ningtian was still cold. Fan Kinjao pulled the two of them and warned them carefully, "In half an hour, you go to the door of Fan's house and cry loudly that the master of the Fan family was beaten. Don't say anything else. Don't answer any questions asked by others." Ninggan and Ningtian nodded. Since they were bought, they must help their master. Besides, the master treated them well during this period. After everyone had gone out, Fan Kinjao took out a jade pendant from his arms and stuffed it into Nanny Su's hand. "Nanny Su, take this and go into the palace to see the queen. Just wait until you see the queen and tell the truth, the queen will understand. The only one who can suppress concubine Yu is the emperor, and the only one who can ask the emperor to intervene is the empress. Since she is now a member of Bailey Fengming, the queen will definitely not leave her alone." Mother Su was a little confused when she saw this tiger operation. "Little miss, what are you trying to do?" Fan Kinjao sneered and stood up and walked towards the door. "Please come back to the palace, please. Mother Su. Since you want to go crazy, let's go crazy together." The originally lively back hall became quiet as everyone left one after another. However, no one knew that Hua Yulian, who should have been sleeping soundly in the back room, had already opened her eyes. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 47. Chapter 47. The Shady Crown Prince. Fan Kinjao did not follow Aunt He immediately when he left Minjiao Yuan. Instead, he took Aunt He away. "Mother He. I always feel like something is not quite right." Fan Kinjao went directly to the Hua family's warehouse and picked through the existing medicinal materials. Then he went to the kitchen and made a cup of tea by himself while boiling water, and then added the selected medicinal materials. After grinding it into powder, he turned around and handed it to Aunt He. "Can I please send this cup of tea to concubine Yu first? I'll tell you that I'm boiling medicine for my mother, and I'll make amends with the tea. I hope concubine Yu won't blame her." He Yan only feels that his hands with tea are all stunned. "Miss Kinjao, where can I make the concubine maiden?" and so on. Fan Kinjao was very sure, "Don't worry, Aunt He, the imperial concubine will be waiting for you. No matter how you are in the palace, you must always leave a good reputation for yourself outside the palace. She has spent her whole life with concubine Yu, her mother-in-law and her daughter-in-law, so she knows exactly what kind of person concubine Yu is." Seeing this, Grandma He could only nod her head. "Miss Kinjao, please hurry up." Fan Kinjao looked at the back of Nanny He hurriedly leaving, still very calm. Even if Nanny Su enters the palace and meets the queen to explain the matter as soon as possible, it will still take some time, and the first thing she has to do is to delay the time. Concubine Yu must have come here with full confidence to force her and her mother to return to Fan Mansion. In this case, she didn't bother to wait for a while longer. Of course, concubine Yu, who was full of success, did not know that the cup of tea with spices was enough to make her forget the length of time. In other words, she still has 1 hour left. Fan Kinjao subconsciously clenched his hands, hoping that Nanny Su would hurry up and hurry up. "Are you a member of the Hua family's Miss Kinjao?" "You are." My servant Lian 11 is a person close to His Highness the Crown Prince. Mother Su was confused. Lian 11 lowered her voice and said, Mommy, there is no need to be nervous. His Highness the Crown Prince knows that concubine Yu has left the palace and has already gone to meet the Emperor to request that the Emperor leave the palace and go to the Hua family. Although she didn't know why His Highness the Crown Prince was willing to help her young lady, since His Highness the Crown Prince was already on the move, she just had to wait here. At this time, there was not only Emperor Yongchang but also the third Prince Bailey Rongs in the imperial study. The princes who went to Hyogyo Temple to pray for blessings returned safely. All the princes came to pay their respects, but Emperor Yongchang left the third prince alone, which shows that he valued and loved him. Bailey Fengming was not surprised when he saw Bailey Rongs and respectfully greeted Emperor Yongchang. Emperor Yongchang looked at the prince who came suddenly and asked doubtfully, "Is something wrong?" Bailey Fengming said softly, "I heard that the Minister of the Ministry of Revenue came to visit me just now, so I came here to share my father's worries." Emperor Yongchang felt like he was being stabbed in the heart by his son. The war in Jiangdu was tense, and most of the tax money collected by the Ministry of Revenue at the beginning of the year was spent on it. Neijiang is a protracted war, and whether it is food, grass, troops, or horses, it is a large amount of expenditure when calculated carefully. Huchba Shangshu has always been a well-known iron rooster, and now he can't just watch all the money go to Jiangdu, so it is obvious that he just came to complain about his poverty. "Tell me about it." Emperor Yongchang retracted his thoughts and forced himself not to think about the face of the Minister of the Ministry of Finance, who looked like a dead mother. "I heard that this time General Hua led his troops to go on an expedition. Fan Qinjiao, the daughter of Hua's family, invested more than 3 million taels of military salary in the military camp. This money was not accumulated over the years, but was earned from selling charcoal in a month. Silver. I asked her to sell charcoal according to the order, and she knows that she should be grateful. The Hua family has always valued girls over boys. If the Hua family's daughter inherits the family business, the military salary invested in the army in the future will probably far exceed the current figure. Although it is true, the Hua family's legitimate daughter is already married to Mr. Fan, because he is not a son-in-law. The Hua family's wife may not be able to inherit the Hua family's business." Emperor Yongchang really felt that it was a pity. If there was someone who could always support the army, the minister of Hubei would not have to cry about poverty with him, and his ears would be clean. Bailey Fengming said unhurriedly, "Normally I can't, but if we make peace with each other, then the Hua family's daughter will be justified." Emperor Yongchang. Because of his military salary, he instigate couples to divorce. Is this something humans do? Bailey Rongs frowned. He never expected to hear Fan Qinjiao's name as soon as he returned to the palace. Thinking of the days when he was so smoked that he shed tears every day, his heart became very clogged. During the snowstorm, everyone received gifts from Miss Huajia Y. The prince also said that Miss Huajia Y also paid military salary. For such a benevolent and righteous woman, how could the prince see his former benefactor and his parents separated? Bailey Rongs looked at Bailey Fengming. They have never gotten along since they were young. As long as it belongs to Bailey Fengming, he will grab it. Not to mention that he is going against him now, he will even have to compete with him for that chair in the future. Bailey Fengming glanced at Bailey Rongs calmly. Those who repay the kindness are the ones who bestow the kindness. Brother Sanhuang has been praying for his father at the Hyogyo Temple. He doesn't know what the needs of Miss Hua's parents are. It's also reasonable. The implication is that if you don't even understand what people want, you'd better shut up. Bailey Rongs' face turned black from the rebuke, and he wanted to argue with him again, but Bailey Fengming stopped looking at him at all. Emperor Yongchang was enlightened when he heard this. The scene in the main hall that day is still fresh in my memory. Although the child was young, he was an extremely independent person. He was also unusually indifferent to the Fan family who had always ignored him. At the same time, a report came from the palace outside the door. "Your Majesty, the guard guarding the door reported that concubine Yu left the palace alone half an hour ago, and the place she reported to was the Hua family." Emperor Yongchang was no longer calm. He knew that there had been a lot of rumors recently, saying that Prime Minister Fan wanted to recognize Fan Qinjiao's mother and daughter. Similarly, he had always known that Prime Minister Fan was close to the third prince in private. If what the prince said is true, concubine Yu's departure from the palace this time is probably to comply with Prime Minister Fan's wishes and force Fan Qinjiao's mother and daughter to return to Fan's house. Originally, Emperor Yongchang disdained to take care of household affairs, but it was different now. This was a major matter related to future military pay. As the saying goes, eating people is short of the mouth, and taking people is short of hands. In the future, Fan Qinjiao obediently fills the army. At this time he is going to help her support her. Bai Tu, prepare the carriage, I want to leave the palace. When Emperor Yongchang spoke, he had already walked out of the imperial study. Bailey Rongs thought about the report from the palace just now, and anxiously wanted to leave the palace to report the news to his mother and concubine. When Bailey Fengming came to the imperial study room today, he made it clear that he wanted to help Fan Qinjiao escape from the control of the Fan mansion. Fortunately, he could still tell his father so clearly about his righteousness. They are really a cunning and insidious group. Bailey Fengming suddenly walked in front of him. The Queen Mother already knows that the third Emperor brother has returned to the palace and is thinking about the third Emperor brother's well-being. She is currently waiting for the third Emperor brother to pay his respects at Fenji Palace. Bailey Rongs was so angry that he gritted his teeth. "You did it on purpose." The father went out of the palace to find his mother and concubine, and it happened that the queen was waiting for him to say hello. Why is it such a coincidence? Bailey Fengming smiled calmly, neither saying yes nor no. As to whether it is true or not, you can make your own guess. Although Bailey Rongs was born to concubine Yu, he did not dare to openly disobey the queen, so he could only turn around and leave with a dark face. On the other side, Fan Qinjiao, who had been standing in the Huajia kitchen for a full hour, knew that he could not wait any longer. Take a deep breath and walk towards the main hall. After 2 lifetimes apart, it was time for her to meet her former mother-in-law. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 48. Chapter 48. What's wrong with not following common sense? In the main hall of the Hua family, concubine Yu sat at the head of the table, while Tao Yuxian and Fan Zixiu sat at the left and right seats respectively. From the moment he walked in, Fan Zixiu had been standing tall and proud in front of Tao Yuxian. He came today with a lot of ambition, and he didn't believe that Fan Qinjiao dared to disobey the imperial concubine's good intentions. But as time passed slowly, the hour was passing by, but Fan Qinjiao still did not show up. Fan Zixiu's puffed up chest gradually deflated again. Sitting here dryly for an hour. Let alone raising his chest and raising his head, his waist was in excruciating pain even if he moved even a little bit. However, concubine Yu had no intention of urging her, so Fan Zixiu had to continue to endure the pain. Tao Yuxian glanced at the teacup held by concubine Yu, a complicated light flashed in her eyes, but she soon returned to her previous calmness. The sound of footsteps suddenly sounded from outside the door, finally breaking the oppressive silence. Fan Zixiu looked at Fan Qinjiao coming in, and suddenly became energetic and said directly, "Naijan, why don't you kneel down quickly?" Since Fan Qinjiao's mother and daughter disappeared 5 years ago and reappeared, the Fan family has not had a good day. How can his temper get better now? Tao Yuxian's face darkened, but he did not act rashly because concubine Yu was in charge. The master is not in the house now. Even if she is thinking about Xiao Qinjiao, she must first consider not letting others get caught. Fan Qinjiao actually knelt down, but it was not Fan Zixia who knelt down, but concubine Yu who was sitting in the middle. My daughter Fan Kinjao sends my regards to the imperial concubine. May the imperial concubine be blessed with peace of mind. Concubine Yu held the teacup in her hand and sipped it gently, as if she didn't hear Fan Kinjao's greetings at all. Fan Zixia naturally understood that this was concubine Yu's show of force, so he simply became more unscrupulous. You are so courageous. Concubine Yu arrived late, but you were late. What crime do you deserve? Fan Kinjao's face was calm. Kinjao did not welcome the imperial concubine. It is Kinjao's fault. However, my mother took medicine and couldn't get away from people. Today's holy emperor values filial piety and righteousness more than the sky. I believe the empress will be considerate. It's not easy for a daughter. Concubine Yu's eyebrows slightly lowered, but she still had no intention of speaking. Fan Zixia didn't expect that he would be ignored one after another, and his anger became even greater. After all, it was a wild habit raised outside, and he didn't even know the basic respect between elder and younger. Fan Kinjao listened to Fan Zixia's continuous denunciation, but he didn't feel angry at all. That's right, her grandfather has always been strong, so strong that he is selfish and only has his own interests in mind. Kinjao has a name and a surname. My grandfather is still alive and my father is still alive. Why is he raised outside? Kinjao is also curious. If Grandpa knows, Grandpa is willing to tell Kinjao a few things. Fan Kinjao turned to look at Fan Zixia, in order to save his face. He is extremely humble, but his words are painful. Fan Zixia was stunned. Tao Yuxian looked at Fan Zixia coldly. Fan Cheng is a high-ranking minister, so he is so fussy with the child. Isn't he really afraid of losing his status? She didn't know that Xiao Kinjao and her daughter were going through hardships before, but now she wants to bully the children of the Hua family under her nose, and she has to nod. Fan Zixia was frozen again. He dared to scold Fan Kinjao angrily, but he did not dare to have a head-on conflict with Tao Yuxian. If he really got angry because of this, Hua Yaoding's wife protecting dog temper would not have taken advantage of the evil obstacles of the Hua family to destroy him. The Prime Minister's mansion? I only know that the children of the Fan family are well behaved and lovely, but I don't know that some of them are also very sharp-tongued. Concubine Yu, who had been pretending to be deaf, finally put down the teacup in her hand and raised her eyes to look at Fan Kinjao, who was kneeling on the ground. At the beginning in the main hall, I only knew that this girl had good medical skills, but I never thought that she also had a perverse temperament. Fan Kinjao bowed slightly, lowered his head and said, "Your Majesty, please forgive me." The first mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, she knew very well that if she wanted to seduce the imperial concubine Yu, both sides would suffer in a head-on confrontation. Concubine Yu was very satisfied with Fan Kinjao's low-key attitude. Her eyebrows flashed with sharp light, and she said with a half-smile, "Since you still have the surname Fan, you must recognize your ancestors and return to the clan no matter what. Even if you don't do it for your mother, must also consider your own future. A child without a father's family, let alone a side wife, can only be an aunt." Tao Yuxian's face was very ugly, although it was impossible to talk about it. The curse is also very unpleasant. If it weren't for the imperial concubine sitting above, Tao Yuxian would have kicked the person out himself. Concubine Yu didn't care that Tao Yuxian was feeling uncomfortable. She only needs Fan Kinjao to know that he is afraid. Sure enough, Fan Kinjao lowered her head, but no one saw the hatred flashing in her eyes. What the imperial concubine taught me is that I know I was wrong. She was thrown into a pit of fire in her last life, so don't even think about pushing her down in this life. Concubine Yu looked at Fan Kinjao without daring to reply, with a hint of sarcasm on her charming face. No matter how smart you are just a child. If you are scared, you will give in. Concubine Yu's words became more and more harsh. It's good to know that you are wrong. I would say that your mother is also stupid. It is human nature for a man to have 3 wives and 4 concubines. Why was she so stubborn when she was born? Her body and bones were all damaged. I deserve to be tortured like this. So she and her mother deserve to live or die, but the evildoers can live happily? He. At this time, concubine Yu, who was completely condescending as a winner, ignored the storm hidden under her red eyes. Since you understand everything you should understand, there is no need to waste my time anymore. I think today is a good day, so you can take your mother back to Fan Mansion. Concubine Yu lowered her head and fiddled with her long nails while cruelly giving an ultimatum. The smell of purple-red flowers penetrated his nose, but no one in the hall could notice it. Only Fan Kinjao, who had been kneeling on the ground, suddenly said with a cry, I know that the imperial concubine has good intentions, but it's not strange for the imperial concubine to have 3 wives and 4 concubines, but mother-in-law, it is unacceptable to be loyal to only one word of love. It is not easy for me to miss my mother, so I have no choice but to refuse. Concubine Yu raised her head in disbelief, as if she heard something wrong. It was obviously a tone of weakness, but every word poked her heart. Why did she not get used to it? After several years in the palace, she also wanted to be favored by the king alone, but... Fan Kinjao raised his head, with his cold eyes. For some reason, concubine Yu felt a little panicked for a moment. She always felt like something was not quite right. The more this happened, the more her anger grew. She shouted loudly, Fan Kinjao, you are so brave. Even if you are protected by the Hua family, you will be punished by death if you offend me like this. This was what Fan Kinjao was waiting for. She immediately stood up and said, please don't blame me. I am willing to die to apologize. As soon as he finished speaking, he hit the pillar at the door directly. Everything happened so suddenly that everyone else in the room was a little confused. Tao Yuxian, who was the first to react and returned, stood up in panic and chased after him without thinking, Xiao Kinjao. Fan Zixia was so frightened that he stood up. If he really died like this, what's the point of bringing back a corpse? Concubine Yu looked at Fan Kinjao, who suddenly jumped out, and her expression turned ugly to a new level. Haven't she already controlled this girl to death? Why? How dare this girl? How dare she? Fan Kinjao naturally dares to do so, and there is nothing he dares to do. She had just held concubine Yu up with her own hands, and now she was about to make her fall down. Stop her quickly. Concubine Yu also stood up, her voice much sharper. If Fan Kinjao really died in front of her, even if she was a noble concubine, she would still be in trouble. The emperor has arrived, Bai Tu's unique voice suddenly sounded outside the door. Concubine Yu, who had just stood up, felt her eyes darken, her body trembled, and she slumped down on the chair again. Why did the emperor come? End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 49. Chapter 49. The fun has just begun. Bai Tu was leading Emperor Yongchang towards the threshold when he saw something rushing over. Bai Tu was smart and subconsciously called for escort. But Emperor Yongchang reacted quickly. Instead of hiding, he grabbed the little man who came by. This time, not only Emperor Yongchang could see it clearly, but even Bai Tu could see it clearly. Ouch, isn't this Miss Kinjao? Doesn't that mean that just now, I was seeking death and boredom? What Bai Tu can figure out, Emperor Yongchang can naturally also figure out. Emperor Yongchang raised his eyes and looked at concubine Yu, who was still slumped on the throne. His expression was not that good. What is your concubine doing? Everyone in the room reacted and quickly knelt on the ground. Tao Yuxian pulled Fan Kinjao and hurriedly bent her knees. Although it was an aftershock, but now thinking about the consequences if the emperor came one step later, she really didn't dare to think about it. Fan Kinjao felt her grandmother tremble and felt guilty in her heart. Because she knew that the emperor could not be that late. Just before she entered the door, she deliberately sprinkled some pollen from the purple-red scented flower in the yard. Purple-red fragrant flowers are also called a bunch of fragrant flowers. They are sweet, pungent, and slightly bitter in nature. Ordinary people only know that this flower can regulate qi, activate blood circulation and remove blood stasis, nourish the spleen and stomach, but they do not know that this flower has a fragrant fragrance and clears the spleen and lungs before being used as medicine. When the imperial concubine arrives, not to mention that no one dares to disturb her, even the servants have to stay away, so the only one who can step into the courtyard after her is the current emperor. Concubine Yu looked at the people kneeling in the room and then reacted belatedly. Suppressing the panic in his heart, he walked over and saluted slightly. My concubine, give your regards to the emperor. Emperor Yongchang looked at concubine Yu, who was half bending her knees in front of him, and remained silent. On the way here, he already knew that concubine Yu was here to help Fan self-study and let Fan Kinjao and his daughter return to Fan's mansion. Along the way, he comforted himself and said that no matter whether Fan Kinjao wanted to or not, if she could return to Fan's mansion, it is also the best result. Concubine Yu may have a kind heart and make such a choice. But what did he see just now? They are all forcing people to hit them head on to death. How can this be good? It is clearly evil. Concubine Yu's legs were numb. Seeing that the emperor had no intention of letting her get up, she could only defend herself. Your Majesty, at the last annual banquet, I fell in love with the legitimate daughter of the Fan family at first sight, but I always worried about it in my heart. This child is pitiful, and I happened to hear that Prime Minister Fan wanted to let their mother and daughter return to the palace, so I thought of leaving the palace to be a peacemaker. Tao Yuxian couldn't stand listening anymore and kowtowed to Emperor Yongchang. This is a matter between the Hua family and the Fan family. How dare you involve concubine Yu to worry about it? It's hard for my husband to go out to fight and be loyal to the country. I wonder if he knew that something was going on at home. Such a thing is so sad. Just now they all wanted to kill her little Kinjao, so now she has nothing to worry about. Emperor Yongchang's scalp went numb after hearing this. Yes, the man is still fighting for his country outside, but what is his woman doing? Baba quickly left the palace and went to other people's homes to show off his power and bully their orphans and widows. If this matter spreads out, it's okay for him to lose his face. Therefore, at this time, Emperor Yongchang could only look at Fan Zixiu, who was standing aside. I have always known that Prime Minister Fan helps the country, but he is so confused when it comes to handling housework. If I were one step late, wouldn't Prime Minister Fan have to bear the burden for the rest of his life, the crime of killing his own granddaughter? Fan Zixiu. He felt wronged, but he did not dare to say it. Emperor Yongchang strode to the main seat with a dark face and sat down. After being silent for a long time, he said again, my beloved concubine and Mrs. Hua's family should be equal. As for Prime Minister Fan, you continue to kneel down. Fan Zixiu. A big pot comes down from the sky, and you have to do it even if you don't have to top it. As the imperial guards outside the door closed the hall door, the main hall became so quiet that even the sound of breathing was unusually obvious. Emperor Yongchang looked at Fan Kinjao and said, little girl of the Fan family, do you know what caused what happened today? Fan Kinjao knelt on the ground again and replied respectfully, my daughter knows. Emperor Yongchang paused and said, then what do you mean? Fan Kinjao did not hesitate at all. I have been wandering around with my mother since I was a child, and I am not used to being with my father. It is reasonable that the imperial concubine has been in the palace without knowing it. It is because I am sensitive and extreme that I thought in order to resist the imperial concubine's necessity, Emperor Yongchang. Oh, he just put the blame on concubine Yuan Fan Zixiu, when she said another sentence. If it weren't for Fan Qingjiao's sincere words in front of him, he really thought she did it on purpose. Concubine, you couldn't sit still, Fan Qingjiao, you are so bold and courageous. I am also thinking about you. Not only do you not appreciate it, but you also threaten me with death. What are your intentions? She is a dignified concubine, but how can she get a yellow-haired girl to make irresponsible remarks? Fan Qingjiao, I dare not presume to speculate on the imperial concubine's thoughts. Concubine you. What kind of tiger-wolf term is this? Fan Qingjiao, do you know that once we divorce, you will be a child without your father's family? Not to mention that your mother can't justly hold her head up in front of everyone, and how will you be better off in the future? Don't you plan to go to the nunnery to ring the bell? Concubine you sneered, her eyes sharp. Fan Qingjiao straightened his back and said calmly, Your Majesty, when I brought my mother back to Hua's house, my mother only had one breath left. Compared with her life, what does this reputation mean? Tao Yuxian suddenly remembered the day Xiao Qingjiao pushed his daughter back home, and tears flowed down his face, no longer able to be controlled. Concubine Yu was so angry that her hands were trembling when she saw that Fan Qingjiao was ignored by her. She is just a girl who can't even speak after being coaxed by her in a few words. How brave! You are still young and don't understand the pros and cons of this. How can you be angry about the matters between the elders? You must not lose the big because of the small. When the time comes, the Hua family and the Fan family will be completely divided into two factions because of you. What benefits can you get from this? As soon as these words came out, even concubine Yu herself did not notice the bitterness and harshness in them. Fan Qingjiao hid a smile at the corner of his lips and said lightly, I don't understand what the imperial concubine said. Concubine Yu. This dead girl. Clenched her teeth, concubine Yu said without giving up, You. Enough. With an angry rebuke, concubine Yu returned to her original form from an angry beast. Looking at Emperor Yongchang, who was sitting on the throne with a dark face, concubine Yu suddenly started to panic. Bai Tu looked on helplessly. The emperor has been caring about your face since he entered the house, but you are not. I wish that the emperor would offend you in public. You said how hard it is for you to think about it. Even if you are a noble concubine, you cannot make rash comments on court matters. Concubine Yu, who calmed down, not only knew that she was reckless, but also understood the reason for her recklessness. Thinking about how Fan Qingjiao had shown weakness to her just now and now deliberately angered her, it was obvious that he was digging a hole for her to jump into. In a blink of an eye, he looked at Fan Qingjiao again, his eyes sharp, as if he was carrying a knife. I didn't expect this half-grown little girl to be so scheming. It was because she underestimated her insidiousness. Emperor Yongchang knew that if he continued to worry about concubine Yu's face at this time, then he would no longer need to lose face. Looking calmly at concubine Yu, who was looking down, his voice also turned completely cold. The Queen Mother has been feeling unwell recently and needs to rest. However, the Queen Mother has always been concerned about the Buddhist scriptures. Since concubine Yu is so energetic, why not go and help the Queen Mother after returning to the palace? Just copy the Buddhist scriptures. Concubine Yu suppressed the anger in her heart, lowered her head and said, I obey your order. Now that the emperor is angry, even if she is unwilling, she cannot show her courage for a moment. Outside the door, there was suddenly a loud noise. Immediately afterwards, there was a report from the Imperial Guard, report to your Majesty, people from the Fan family are knocking on the door. There was chaos outside the door, and the people in the room had different expressions. Only Fan Qingjiao, who was kneeling in the middle, had an unusually calm expression. Because she knew very well that the fun had just begun. End of this chapter. The legitimate daughter of the prosperous medical fragrance will not marry. Author, Jinchi. Chapter 50. Chapter 50 The Scumbag Father. Fan Zixiu, who had already carried a big pot on his back, immediately trembled and kowtowed quickly. "Your Majesty, it must be someone from the Hua family who pretends to slander our Fan family. Your Majesty must make the decision for me." Although concubine Yu wanted to be wise and protect herself, if something really happened to the Hua family at this time, her face would be disgraced, so she quickly spoke to persuade her. "Your Majesty, Fan Mansion has always been successful and guarded against arrogance and impetuosity. How can we do this now? For such a ridiculous thing to happen, there must be some hidden secret behind it." Emperor Yongchang was really angry and said angrily, "Catch the troublemaker in here. I want to see who is so bold." Concubine Yu took the opportunity to gouge out Fan Qinjiao. "I'm afraid this dead girl has done something good again." Fan Qinjiao knelt on the ground without changing his expression, looking at concubine Yu with a look that seemed calm but was actually calm. "She did do it, but who knows?" The imperial guards around Emperor Yongchang were not vegetarians. In just a moment, the troublemakers were thrown into the main hall. And the one who was thrown into the door was Fan Yurong and several servants from the Hua family. Fan Zixiu, who was just lying on the ground kowtowing and shouting that he was wronged, looked at his son who was thrown to the ground. His eyes were so angry that black smoke was about to come out. Fan Yurong was still happy when he saw his father for the first time. "Father, are you okay?" Fan Zixiu only regretted that he had never given birth to this son. "Your Majesty, what can happen to me?" When Fan Yurong rushed in with the boy, he felt bad when he saw the guards in yellow jackets standing in the yard. At that time, he was only thinking about what he should do if his father had something wrong with him. The hot ones continued to rush over. As a result, when he heard his father say that the emperor was actually here, he began to feel guilty. Looked up quietly, and sure enough, he saw Emperor Yongchang sitting there with a dark face. Fan Yurong became even more panicked, and even her calves began to twist. Wei, I am here to see the emperor." Fan Yurong wanted to kneel down, but his legs refused to obey him and he gnawed on the ground like a dog. Emperor Yongchang's face turned darker when he saw Fan Yurong's dissatisfied look, and he didn't even bother to ask. How could such a person become a minister in the palace? He will conduct a thorough investigation when he returns. Check it hard. Tao Yuxian looked at such a worthless man and never thought that his daughter would like him. Is it because of his face that looks like a human? Fan Qinjiao looked at it indifferently, feeling that he was used to it. As a father and daughter in 2 generations, she has long known that her father is good for nothing. He either listens to the drunkard or his own father in everything. To put it bluntly, he is just a loser who has accomplished nothing. Concubine Yu also felt embarrassed, but she could never let herself be embarrassed, so she took the initiative to ask, "I wonder what the reason for Mr. Fan coming here in such a hurry is." This is a very good question. If Fan Yurong is making trouble in front of him, he can find an excuse to explain it away. If Fan Yurong is wrongly accused, he can also take the opportunity to explain. With such a round millstone, even Tao Yuxian would admit that he was worthy of being equal to the queen in the harem. Sure enough, Fan Yurong felt emboldened when he heard this. "Your Majesty, your concubine, my father kindly wants Fan Qinjiao and his daughter to return home to recognize their ancestors, but I don't want the Hua family to be so ignorant. How dare you hurt my father? Of course I won't give up." Tao Yuxian spoke coldly, "It's ridiculous. Are our Hua family such unreasonable and reckless people? What is the purpose of Minister Fan in so unfairly accusing my Hua family?" Fan Yurong swore firmly, "How could I be slandering? I heard it with my own ears in Fan Mansion. Someone came to the door of our house and said that my father was injured by the 3rd son of the Hua family, and I also saw with my own eyes the 3rd son of the Hua family riding a horse. He rode his horse and ran all the way from the military camp to Hua's house. When someone publicized this matter at the door of the house, the reason why he believed it so much was because not only he, but also the few boys lying next to him had seen with their own eyes the third son of the Hua family riding a horse in the street. Go galloping. They are all officials of the imperial court, so he can't mistake the clothes worn by the third son of the Hua family. Tao Yuxian no longer wanted to waste time with Fan Yurong, and knelt directly in front of Emperor Yongchang, to inform the emperor, Hua Yi, the third son of the Hua family, is staying behind in the army. As for whether Hua Yi has returned to the Hua family, the emperor will send someone to the army to find out. Emperor Yongchang looked at Fan Zixiu subconsciously. Does I King think it is necessary to ask? As soon as Fan Zixiu heard this, he knew that his son had been deceived, and he immediately shook his head. However, before he could say anything, he saw Fan Qinjiao suddenly pounce on Fan Yurong. Father, do you know what kind of serious crime it is to disrespect the Prime Minister in public? My daughter knows that her father does not like the Hua family and everyone in the Hua family, but no matter what, her father cannot kill her third uncle, Fan Qinjiao. He was crying like he was heartbroken. Fan Yurong originally planned to listen to his father, but now seeing Fan Qinjiao's appearance, he suddenly became firm in his thoughts. If she didn't feel guilty, why was she crying? Fan Qinjiao, you are really capable. Your grandfather was kind enough to take you and your mother back. You are just ungrateful. Now you are colluding with your third uncle to disrespect your grandfather, Fan Yurong has said. A man's self-esteem can only be found in Fan Qinjiao's mother and daughter. Now, in order to show his masculinity, he directly raised his arms. Concubine Yu knew something was wrong, but she wanted to stop it, but it was too late. Pa! A clear slap suddenly sounded. Fan Qinjiao was beaten until he fell to the ground. Tao Yuxian was really angry. He hugged Fan Qinjiao, his distressed hands trembling. Fan family, you are so brave. Do you really think that our Hua family is easy to bully? Your Majesty, I wish you to stop what happened today. All honors to the Tao family and the Hua family, but rely on the emperor to find out the truth. Fan Zixiu hurriedly said, it's getting late, and it's not too late to discuss this matter later. It's important that the emperor and the concubine return to the palace first. Fan Yurong felt uncomfortable. He finally caught the Hua family. Why didn't he investigate? But he really didn't dare to go against his father's wishes. Unexpectedly, just when he subconsciously wanted to lower his head, he saw Fan Qinjiao nestled in Tao Yuxian's arms, looking at him with pleading eyes. Fan Yurong immediately became excited and said without thinking, check it, we must check it. Fan Zixiu was so angry that his eyes turned black. You. Father, at this time, why are you still helping the Hua family to hide the evildoers? Today we must find out the truth. In this way, he can take away Fan Qinjiao's mother and daughter in a fair and just manner. Come here, go to the military camp and check it carefully for me. This time, it was Emperor Yongchang who gave the order directly. Fan Zixiu looked at Fan Yurong, who looked determined to win, with a look of despair on his face. Why did he give birth to a child without a head? Concubine Yu doesn't want to talk anymore. Today, she was almost dragged into the water because of Fan Yurong, a loser. Anyway, she had already gotten everything she wanted. As for how to deal with this matter, it had nothing to do with her. End of this chapter.